Hello and welcome to today's webinar, all about COVID safe check-in inventories. All you need to know. It's going to be presented by myself, Richard Abbots, and also Michael Hill from the TDS. So without further ado, just a short introduction about myself. I'm the founder here at Inventory Hive. For those of you that don't know what Inventory Hive is or what we do, we're a cloud-based software platform for the creation of property reports that relate to condition, cleanliness, and safety compliance. We're a paperless platform in that we engage with tenants on the platform as well and get them to interact with their reports. I am a qualified inventory clerk and also qualified housing health and safety rated system officer, which I suppose is also relevant to today's webinar. I'm going to be focusing much of the content that I discuss about practical use and tips for performing, checking inventories remotely. That's the area that I'm going to focus on, and I'll just hand you over to Michael, and Michael will also do his introduction.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so Michael Hill, I'm an operations manager for one of our dispute schemes at TDS, and I've been with TDS for coming up to around 6 years now. The majority of that time was spent working as an adjudicator and within our different dispute resolution functions. So I'll probably be looking at this from more of the angle of the sort of end of tenancy and sort of adjudication perspective.
Superb. Okay, great. So specifically the topics we're going to cover in the presentation is we're going to have a look at the current gov.uk advice on moving home, which was last updated on the 29th of August. We're going to have a look at some risk assessment considerations as well. So if you were to have a health and safety competent person write some kind of risk assessment policy for you, what kind of considerations would they factor in at the moment? We're then going to have a look at some other considerations about attended check-ins in general. So that's not necessarily specific to COVID. It could relate to considerations prior to that period. We're then going to also have a look at how perhaps things could be done remotely, where you can capture feedback and approval. And then finally, we're just going to do a brief summary of other relevant related webinars that you may want to take a look at. So in terms of the gov.uk advice on moving home, I thought I'd hand you over to Michael on this bit. Michael, perhaps if you could summarise the most relevant points on that.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So, as you say, the government advice on moving home, I think this is the latest guidance which was issued, as you said, on the 29th of August. And I'll just say, given the situation is sort of constantly evolving, it's probably worth just keeping an eye out for any new guidance or changes that are made there. So I think, first and foremost, it kind of goes without saying that viewings and property inspections should not be conducted if a tenant is symptomatic or self-isolating. A tenant doesn't necessarily need to be present for the check-in inspection, so it may be that you can carry this out in the tenant's absence and then remotely, send that across to the tenant to comment on. I think for a checkout report, if a tenant is self-isolating or symptomatic, you'll need to wait, obviously, to carry out the inspection. And whilst we ordinarily expect that a check-in and a check-out are conducted within a day or two of the start and end of the tenancy, we do accept the current climate, and this may have to be delayed. So this would be taken into account for any dispute. So I think the overarching message there from the government is obviously, as safety comes first, and if you have to delay the inspection slightly before or take them a bit earlier at the start of the tenancy, that's absolutely fine, and we accept that may be necessary. We wouldn't rule out a report on the basis that it was a week after the tenancy ended, as we accept it it might have been necessary to delay that. I think the other thing the government is saying is, sorry, go on, Richard.
No, sorry, I was just agreeing with you. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing the government is sort of saying is that all letting agents should obtain landlord and tenant consent for inventory appointments to be carried out. If you do need to make it, a period earlier than the tenancy starts or after it's ended, and without anyone present, as this seems to be the safest way to conduct an inventory in current times. The Gov guidance also discusses, cleaning of the property to minimise any spread of the virus. So, make sure that if cleaning is carried out, it's recorded in the inventory and that you retain a copy of the invoice or receipt. because that will be brilliant evidence at the end, along with your inventory, to show that you did have the property professionally cleaned, and that was the standard of cleanliness at the start of the tenancy. So whilst you're looking to rely on your check-in inspection as your benchmark for cleanliness, if you do have to have it carried out, if you do have to have cleaning carried out as a result of the COVID pandemic, that could also be good evidence at the end also. There's also a recommendation from the government to conduct as many checks as necessary remotely, as the safety of all parties is the most important thing. So I'm sure Richard will come onto it later, but sending documents remotely and sharing the inventory and checkout remotely is the best way to approach it in the current climate. And given that you're likely to be delivering these documents to the tenant remotely or by email rather than in person, we'd recommend that you just keep an audit trail of this. So as I said earlier, we accept that it might not be feasible or safe to conduct a check-in or check-out inspection at the immediate start or end of the tenancy. And if you therefore delay it a bit, just make sure the tenant's provided with a copy of the report so that any comments they have can be added, and you can prove that the document was actually sent to them. So that's just a sort of a high-level summary of the current government advice on moving home. And as I say, I would just keep checking in on it to see if it's updated over the next few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, just to kind of, add a bit of context to that as well. At Inventory Hive, some of our team had to go to some apartment blocks over the last few weeks and do some inspections on a number of apartments. Prior to doing that, we instructed our competent health and safety advisor to create policy for us. And without going into too much detail on that, it was made very clear to us that if we were to be interacting, with customers, i.e., tenants at properties, that you'll have to have some control measures in place in order to reduce the level of risk. And as I say, I'm not going to go through, the points that were raised or identified within that document. However, what we'll say is, the long and short of it is, if wherever possible you can do things remotely and robustly, then that is most definitely the most sensible way to do things. So if you don't need to do a physical attended check-in in the presence of the tenant, then it is perhaps not the best way to go if you don't have to meet them there in person. Even prior to the pandemic, when things kicked off in March, there's been I suppose changes to legislation over the past couple of years that have increasingly meant that attended check-ins have perhaps become less relevant or more redundant due to the rise of technology. A really good example is it can, sometimes with attended check-ins, it can be a missed opportunity for issues to get raised that are perhaps non-visual. So, for example, if you're a tenant, you're moving into a property and you meet, an inventory clerk, a landlord, or an agent at the property, and they walk you around to get you to confirm or sign off about the condition and the cleanliness of the compliance. Sometimes tenants will, let's face it, they'll sign quite quickly. If they've got a removal van waiting outside and they're waiting to move into the property, the last thing that they want to do is walk around and look at the skirting board. Now, by no means am I suggesting that they feel pressured into doing that. However, it does miss the opportunity for maintenance issues that you kind of only experience when you've lived in a property for a day or two to be identified. A good example might be, I don't know, the shower screen hinge is loose or something silly like that. Those are issues that could potentially become disputes at the end of the tenancy, and therefore, it's important to give somebody the opportunity to be able to raise those. I mean, Michael, just from a TVS perspective, I'd imagine from having looked and adjudicated reports and disputes, that kind of issue, has perhaps been a common scenario. Would you say?
Yeah, completely agree with what you're saying. Yeah, I think even if a tenant does attend the check-in around the property and sign off on a document and agree that it's accurate, you do have to consider that, like you say, they need to live there for a few days, and sometimes actually living in the property for a day or two and then sending an email to the agent or landlord and saying, this plug socket doesn't work, or the blind won't come down properly. That doesn't seem unreasonable. So actually, whilst the benefit of an attended check-in is that the tenant may sign, that doesn't necessarily mean that issues they raise subsequently over the next few days will be disregarded.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, sometimes those disputes don't or those issues don't rear their head until it's checkout. It's too late.
Exactly.
So okay, so yeah, so I mean, also moving on to the second point that on this slide, so is in relation to cost efficiency. And again, irrespective of the current pandemic, the tenant fee ban did identify that actually doing attended check-ins is perhaps not the most cost efficient way of doing things, because it often involves somebody going to a property to create the inventory report and then subsequently going back the next day or a week later or whenever that may be to do the attended check-in. So again, that's obviously that's time, and obviously as with the current pandemic, that's also increased risk in terms of that interaction. So that's something else to consider. As we've just mentioned a moment ago as well, is sometimes by doing those attended check-ins, there can be less tenant-resident engagement in a convenient way. Um, as we said before, tenants when they're moving into a property, they want to get moved in on that day when they've got the removal van waiting outside, and therefore it can sometimes discourage them from engaging with that report, which can lead to, unfortunately, unnecessary disputes.
Yeah,
Often attended check-ins are done for compliance reasons as well. So a common reason I come across for attended check-ins being performed is to confirm that the smoke alarm was working upon check-in. Now, it's important to note that you can still identify that, and have the tenant, have the resident agree and confirm that and check that themselves as part of your declaration and as part of your remote paperless process. Now, that's something as a software platform that we build into our workflows to make sure that we're highlighting to the tenant, to the resident, they should be checking their smoke alarms on the day they move in, and that they should also be checking them on a periodic basis as well. And this is where, as you rightly said, Michael, it's really important to have an audit trail, have records, have notes, so that you can refer back to them should you need to throughout the tenancy. I mean, the burden of proof on these issues always sits with the landlord, and therefore it's important to have clear records that highlight what was done and when it was done.
exactly.
So, aside from that as well, there's just one final point on that I thought it's worth also mentioning as well, that we are coming across increasing popularity in key safes, exterior key safes, because of course it can reduce the need to physically meet the tenant in person and move them into the property. Things can be done at distance remotely, which again, as we said before, obviously reduces the risk with the way things are at the moment. Now, on that note as well, perhaps, what is a convenient way, for a tenant, for a resident to feedback? Why is it important that they have the opportunity in which to feedback? I think historically, residents, tenants feeding back has been a bit of an admin headache because, of course, you've got to tie up emails and confirm things. And I think that's why sometimes attended check-ins were favoured, over the years. But with the way things are now, and for example, as a platform at Inventory Hive, what we do is we capture their signature prior to them moving in, and then we store that signature on the platform. So they're not agreeing to the contents when they do their initial signature. They're just signing to agree that they've received it safely, which then means subsequently when they move into their property, they have a finite window in which to have a look around the property, compare it to the report. As you can see from the screen recording on the phone, on the presentation at the moment, they can then look around the property. If 360 photos were captured, they can navigate the room accordingly. And then if they do find any issues of concern, whether it be condition or cleanliness, they can add a comment, which of course adds more detail to the report. They can then also load a photo into that as well. So it's important, that is objective. So they can't just add a comment, it has to be backed up with a photo. Now, of course, the benefit being there is it protects the tenant, it protects the landlord, because they've all had a fair say, and everything gets audit trailed in the right place, which of course is then used at checkout if there are any disagreements. So it's all about having a fair starting point, and often, over the years we've seen, disputes arise because the inventory is only really engaged with at checkout, which is obviously of no use. The point in time in which to get these issues agreed and identified is at the beginning of the tenancy.
Yeah, I think as well, Richard, it's really useful for an adjudicator in that perspective, being able to see that a tenant has been sent the report and if they've added comments, they've also added a photograph to support that. And if they haven't added comments, then obviously they accept that, you know, it's as per the report.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's something that you know, obviously we've seen you know, increasingly popular since we launched it on the platform. And you know, even earlier in the year we enabled virtual visits to happen when property, and interim property inspections were being performed as well. Because again, it's about the safest and easiest way, whilst also having an audit trail. So, yeah, so hopefully that's kind of given a bit of food for thought today about COVID safe check-in inventories. We have performed and have various other webinars that are related and relevant. So, for instance, you'll be able to take part in our how to conduct robust and time-efficient inventories. So you'll find that in our webinar section. We also performed one with the National Residential Landlords Association as well recently, which was all about inventories and their importance in evidencing fitness for human habitation compliance. Again, it's that's worth a look. There's quite a lot of questions that were put to us as well during that webinar. There was over 1,500 landlords attended that one, so definitely worth a watch. Yeah, so Michael, do you have anything else you wanted to add at this stage?
No, like I say, I mean, hopefully it's a good overview for those attending, but just keep up to date with any of the latest guidance, and hopefully we can produce some more content soon if that does update.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks for your time, Michael. And yeah,
Thank
hope
you.
to see you on another one soon. Thanks.